Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the Great Dynamics podcast. My name is Ahmed Hassan, and today with me is a good friend of mine and a very interesting guy. Some might call him the snow leopard. I call him Ray White. Ray is a former CIA intelligence officer, case officer with interested focuses. He will go into that a little bit more, and I would like to welcome him on this first episode back. Thank you, Ray.
Hey, thanks, Ahmed. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here today speaking with you.
All right, Ray. So
you're making me blush, by the way.
Well, good that we're not using camera then. So, Ray, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your career?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I grew up in the great state of Rhode Island, which is the smallest state in the United States, in a little tiny town called Slatersville. It's one of the first mill towns in America. Your typical childhood, riding bicycles in the streets, and nobody locked their doors, and little houses and little streets, and all the rest of it. It was a really kind of a idyllic place to grow up. Always had an interest in overseas things. My grandfather was a pretty highly decorated World War II vet, 2 Silver Stars and 5 Bronze Stars for valor. Who would always, Army Ranger, actually was the chairman of Ranger School at one point. Had received battlefield promotions throughout World War II. Was one of four soldiers actually in his company. So he quickly was promoted, let's say, to second lieutenant in the battlefield. But nonetheless, he'd always entertain us with stories of daring do, let's say, when he was in the military, and that really just always captivated me in terms of all the experiences he had overseas. And you can imagine as a young child, interested in adventure and exploration, how it really motivated me and inspired me. So I guess the bottom line is I've always wanted to work overseas. I always wanted to live overseas. Other cultures always fascinated me. History always fascinated me. And just a general intellectual curiosity and a sense of exploration. So I went to university in Washington, D.C., and essentially when I graduated from university with a degree in international studies, there were no jobs. It was the Clinton era, and there was a 2-year hiring freeze on all government positions. So at that time, I was interested in looking at Foreign Commercial Service, maybe the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, the agency, of course, and Department of State. But there were literally no jobs. So I went back to school to be a social studies teacher. Thought I was going to be a high school social studies teacher. Got my master's degree. Yeah. And then that's when things kind of changed for me. So to go back to my little tiny town that no one's heard of, lo and behold, my mom sent me a job clipping for clerk typists with the agency. And I'm the type of person, self-awareness has always been important to me. So I know that, for me to make the A team, I always have to prove myself and work my way up the ladder, whether it's sports or anything else. So I applied for this job and heard back from them, actually. Received a very undetailed note by some lady. I think her name was Cindy L or something like that. And I was invited in for an interview, so that seemed promising. And went in and did all the clerical things I needed to do. I, typed and did math problems and talked to a psychologist and everything else. So things seemed to be on the right track. But then it was another year and a half before I actually heard anything. So patience is a very important thing in the agency. And also tenacity, which I'll get to later. But essentially the persistence I had. The other thing I forgot to add too was my roommate and I were both looking for jobs. So every Friday at 9:30, he'd come down to my office and we'd fax in our CVs to the agency. And we did this for 3 months straight. So maybe they finally got sick of hearing from us. But ultimately, I was hired in as a secretary after a 2-year wait, decided not to become a teacher, but ended up pursuing a degree in a master's degree in adult education, which I later used in my career. So that's a bit about how I made my way into the agency. It was definitely not a straight line. And the beauty of the agency is this. There's a place for everybody. At least there used to be. Things have changed quite a bit, but it used to be that you would eventually once you got in the door, you'd find your happy home. And that's more or less what happened to me. I was working in the Korea office, handling North and South Korea, and on the analytical side, the directorate of analysis. I used to be the directorate of intelligence. And it was an okay job, but I knew it was just a starting point for me. And that's when I met a very good friend, mentor, colleague, you name it, in between. I actually worked for this individual at one point who was across the hall on the operations side. And he used to come over and use our conference room, which of course annoyed my boss, but that naturally made me very happy. And he was he was an only child, played ice hockey, actually went to Cornell and was from the New England area, let's say. And so he and I had a lot in common. And he eventually, I went over and knocked on his door one night at 9:30, 10 o'clock, because I used to work on the presidential briefing books. And I said, hey, whatever you're doing seems a lot more interesting than what I'm doing. And would you mind sharing? So he eventually made some introductions for me to come over to the Directorate of Operations. And that's where I landed. And I've been there for the last 25 years until I retired in 2022.
Very interesting. I think what you said about you and your roommate faxing every Friday your CV, and speaking of tenacity, today when I speak to young people that want to work in the intelligence sector, they have a hard time sending one CV. Just one.
Yeah, right.
Let alone every Friday,
Yeah.
Or what if I reject it? Well, you probably will be rejected because it's the top 1% that only gets in, pretty much. So you have to try. You keep trying. And I think we know Marcel, who told me once about a guy that he knew that applied 10 times to the agency. And after years of applying, finally got an interview and got in. So there's a lesson somewhere in there.
Yeah, don't give up. If it's something you really want, I always say keep your eye on the ball. Don't get distracted. If it's something you really want, then you don't take no. You push through and persevere. And eventually it'll pay off. I'm a firm believer in that. Might not be immediate, and unfortunately I think in this day and age, people expect immediate results. So it's a bit of a different mindset. So when you finally make that jump to Director of Operations, how is that first day like? So good question. That's a really good question. I basically went over. They wanted to sniff me out, so to speak, because that's how it works in the operations world. Everyone has to. It's like a pack of wolves essentially, and then you got to get sniffed out before they let you in. So there I was sitting in a room with a senior executive, and then of course my mentor who was there with me. It was the three of us. And then come to find out, here's what happened. So this is kind of an interesting story. The senior executive actually came in as a GS2 mail clerk attendant, which is, about as bottom of the rung of the ladder as you can go, and had worked his way up to be a senior executive. My mentor came in as a clerk typist, also with a law degree from an Ivy League school, and had worked his way up the ladder. And then there was me from small town America, who came in as also a secretary and had worked my way up the ladder. So the three of us had this common denominator, and I think that's probably what really resonated and what really convinced them that, again, to go back to that persistence piece. The other thing that's important too is, in this career, I'm an observer, let's say, a master observer. There is a common thread with people who are successful. And that is, there's always somebody along the way who's helped them out, who's given them a hand, who's, introduced them to somebody who's advocated on their behalf. And that's literally what happened to me in this situation. I had, kind of the meeting of the minds, so to speak, in this office. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, you come work for us for a year, and then we'll send you down to training at the iconic facility, and we'll sponsor you. And I said, hey, perfect. And that's what I did. And then I started literally a week later, I think. It might not even have been that much. I was so eager to get out of my old office. I started moving my things almost immediately. And my first day, I was definitely a little bit nervous. I wasn't quite sure what to expect. But I knew straight away once I saw the smiling faces, people waiting for me, and they said, hey, this is going to be the person that's going to be working with you. And I can remember the boss telling me, you are going to be an expert on all things around nuclear, and you're going to be a nuclear expert. And I said, wow, that sounds really fascinating, because I knew nothing about nuclear anything. And I mean, I knew a little bit about Iran, but not a whole lot. So yeah, essentially that first day really shaped my career moving forward. The other thing I learned is that people in the directorate of operations are tricksters and have a reverent sense of humor. And we had a lot of fun together, just messing around with each other, and having a laugh at each other's expense, so to speak.
So like practical jokes type of stuff?
Oh yeah. So this guy who was the mentor actually became my supervisor. He for whatever reason, I ended up working with him. And I can remember he went off on a trip one time. He's a Scandinavian guy with like a great sense of humor. But he came back from this trip, he wasn't so happy. And we thought we'd play a joke on him. So we went into work early, if you can imagine that. Who goes into work early these days? But yeah, just because. But we went into work early and with a power drill, removed all the cubicles. So his cube, which was on the end of this row of desks near the window, we actually blocked him from getting to his desk by redoing the cubes. So he came in. I had no clue that his weekend was a complete disaster. He had gone on some trip last minute and was really frustrated. And he walked in huffing and puffing and went to go to his desk and couldn't make it there. Walked around the other side of the office, couldn't get there. And we're sitting there just laughing our buns off. And he was like, what's so funny? And oh my God. So it's just that kind of stuff.
That's good. That's a good one.
Yeah, good fun, right? You have to have fun. My mom always said, if you're not having fun, it's not worth doing. And she was exactly right.
Absolutely true. So when you left, where you started out, you said you were not really happy with where you were. But if you make a step like that, a step up or a lateral move, does that set bad blood with where you were?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the office I was in, they knew, actually from day one, they knew that I wasn't going to be there long. I mean, I had a master's degree, and here I was, making photocopies and organizing things. I think it just wasn't a good match for me either. So my boss at that time had, he made he was, I think he wanted me to ask his permission or something to move over to the other assignment, which naturally I wasn't going to do because he couldn't really help me anyway. But number two, I think he felt a little bit maybe, embarrassed, or it just put him in a situation where he then decided to make me a counteroffer, let's say, which was just, it wasn't even, it was kind of laughable. So at that point there, I knew the gig was up, and it was just a matter of moving over to the other office. And funny enough, I've seen people from that original office since then, the Korea office, and they've gone on to do all sorts of things and become seniors throughout the organization. And I've seen these people overseas as I've moved through my career and gone up the ladder too. So it's kind of funny because it's like I remember you way back when kind of situation. But I'm happy to say that every single person I've run into that I used to work with has been happy that I moved throughout my career in a positive upward trajectory. So to answer your question, no bad blood or no hard feelings.
So you mentioned that your focus was going to be around nuclear, right?
Yeah.
Which is very poignant today.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Is it something that you're interested in? Do you follow it? Is it something that now you're out, you can even dabble in or not? Is that?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I'd say, yes. So to answer, I still follow the issue. Not only the nuke piece, but the missile piece, ballistic missiles and chem bioweapons and IRGC and everything in between. So yes, I do follow it. And then I also worked on counterterrorism. So clearly there's a link between Iran and counterterrorism that I follow too.
I think, your silence spoke enough there. So what I wanted to ask you was, since you've been with the agency for 25 years, and I've spoken to other people that were there for a long time, particularly throughout the global war on terror. And how was that shift or cultural change for you in the CIA, or didn't you see it as a big change?
Yeah. So just to go back to your last point real fast, the one thing I take great pride in is that the Iranians never acquired a nuclear weapon on my watch. And I was the chief of several offices focused on this issue overseas. Actually, essentially the main office is focused on that particular topic. So that's something that I wear as a badge of honor. In terms of counterterrorism, the agency's had two fundamental shifts since I came on board. One was the war on terror after September 11th, 2001. And then the second's been in the last 7 or 8 years. And frankly, I think it's a leadership change. It's based on the administrations that we've had, and it's also based on, in my humble opinion, just a real lack of leadership in the organization from top to bottom, and that's led to a lot of issues that still challenge the agency today. I think the other thing is the agency used to be an exclusive agency. It was the president's right hand as an executive agency. And now the agency is just jumbled in with a bunch of other agencies, frankly. It still has a robust position, but it's competing like every other agency. And as they hire more people, it's become more bureaucratized, so to speak. So the war on terror, to go back to that, yes, there was a dramatic shift. Now, I was fortunate in that I still worked on an issue that people cared about, which was nuclear weapons. And, the Irans and the North Koreas and all the other countries out there pursuing programs and having programs, frankly. We also had the AQ-CON network during that period, first part of my career, as well as Libya, frankly, which was a major threat that people have kind of lost sight of. But they were pretty hell-bent on either buying a weapon or producing their own weapon with help from others. So as far as being distracted or having my resources taken or whatnot, I never really experienced that. I always worked a global issue. It wasn't a regional issue or a specific issue. So the short answer is no. I never really felt the depletion of resources because what I was working on was always considered a tier 1 priority.
Because what I find interesting is obviously when in the early days before it was called the CIA in the OSS period, it was a paramilitary organization where during the war on terror kind of leaned back into that. And now we're looking at something I find interesting. I think what the focus is in all the papers and everything that's been spoken about is this near-peer competition, the Chinas, the Russias, and these type of threats. But calling it now, we're in a post-global war on terror, we're in a near-peer conflict or pre-near-peer conflict era. What if the adversary does not want to play near-peer? What if they want to continue using proxies and what they're doing right now? So even if you change the view of like, hey, this is the new threat, this is the new adversary, but the game is still the same.
Yeah,
in a sense.
How do you tackle this issue?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think we're in a new period right now, frankly, and I'll tell you why. The Cold War, things were much more defined when I first, when you and I were growing up, when I first came on board. There were sides. People took sides. And then as that situation and the Soviet Union dissolved, then you had all these loose ends, and then the emergence of terrorism and violent groups in their early days, right? So I'm reading about Black September and the Munich massacre. I'm decided I wanted to take another look at that, so I've picked up a couple of books on that topic. Then we entered into a period of nation states like Iran's and North Korea's who posed threats to us in a different way. And that would be along the proliferation lines with the weapons of mass destruction. And then the September 11th happened and the terrorism aspect for the last 20 years. So I think it's been an evolving situation. What I will say is this. One, the U.S. government is very slow to anticipate threats. Okay, so when I first started my career, I was early on, calling for action against China, for example. This was, 17 years ago. And back then, people weren't even focused on China at all. Now it's, a huge topic. So I think, one, people, the agency and others just aren't, they're set up to be proactive. But frankly, it's the people that make up the organization, and it's the people that create the mindset that allow us to take on these challenges and set the tone for things. And so I think two things have happened fundamentally in the last 5 years, 7 years, 10 years or so. And that's, one, the mindset's changed. It's no longer what I call a green light mindset, which is go, go, go until you're told to stop. It's more stop, check with lawyers, stop, that kind of thing. And that's, again, to go back to your point about the OSS, that was kind of the mentality of those days, was green light, go, because we had a pressing threat in terms of Nazi Germany. We had to, we had to face and defeat. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is that the challenges are they're more amorphous these days. They're not as black and white. They're not as, you just look at Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran's influence in the region with both those groups, and one's in Lebanon and one's on the Gaza and also the West Bank, but mostly Gaza. It's just a lot more complicated than it was previously. It's not as black and white, and you're dealing with bureaucracies at the end of the day, and they don't really like those kinds of things. They like clear-cut things. They like to respond in a clear-cut manner too. And then I think the last thing is just, frankly, the United States as a superpower. Our influence has kind of gone up and down over the past few years, and that, frankly, has also had an impact on things in terms of our global presence and in terms of the leadership we've shown and the messages we've sent to the rest of the world. So you're dealing with a lot of factors right now. Some are self-induced, frankly. Some are just understanding the current threats that are out there. And then also the threats are evolving, too. They're not just static threats, they're dynamic threats that evolve. Terrorism threat being one of those. I mean, just look at ISIS and how it's moved, from the Levant area to Africa to, it's all over the place, right? And it's like whack-a-mole almost with these kinds of things. So I think there's like a very complicated situation right now, and that makes it even more difficult for the intelligence agencies because one, you have to identify the problem before you can start figuring out how you're going to solve it or react to it. And I think those have all been contributing factors into what we're looking at today.
Because obviously this is very fascinating. I think people look at the CIA as this ominous and it works in its favor and against it obviously also. But what I find maybe worrying is, I don't know if that's the right word, but you're seeing this rejection of quote unquote Western values. You're seeing that in Africa. You're seeing that in parts of Asia, but in Africa it's the most pronounced. Do you see a role for any intelligence organization in that? And how do you then reconcile that with the threats that are out there? Because you don't have the access that you had yesterday.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that's a super thoughtful question. All I can say is the rules of the game have changed, and in terms of how the agencies knew how to play, and they continue to change. And that's really the biggest challenge, is anticipating what the next rules will be. So as we have all these challenges, whether it be counterterrorism, whether it be China's influence, whether it be, whatever it may be, coups and revolutions and, We're in an evolving world right now with evolving challenges and evolving threats. And in some cases, the toughest part is just identifying what those things are, yet alone trying to figure out what the next threat will be or what it will evolve into. I mean, whoever thought ISIS, for example, would spread into Southeast Asia or would spread into Africa? Whoever thought that Iran and Hezbollah and these, Iran-backed groups would have a presence in South America, for example? And then you look at the players in the past that posed a threat. They don't necessarily pose a threat anymore, and now we have new players emerging. Or for example, the Canada and India row that's going on right now. Who would ever think that they'd be at odds with each other? Syria clearly is just a mess. I think no matter who you talk to, everyone can agree on that. It's it's just a complete and utter mess with all sorts of civil war and obviously there's terrorism problems and the influence of Russia and other countries and the allies and Turkey and the Kurds, and that to me is, I'm not sure how anyone's gonna sort that one out. But
it's a very difficult one. I mean, it's interesting that Gulf countries now are seeing better ties with Assad, even though they were the ones funding.
Yeah, amazing.
And
frankly, you know what? That could change too. So that's exactly
absolutely
what I'm talking about. 5 years from now, it could be a completely different situation. So how do you get ahead of that? I don't know. I really don't know. All I do know, though, is human intelligence is more important than it's ever been before. And people like me, guys like me, we're like currently seen as the dinosaurs. I always say break glass in a case of emergency types, because there's an over-reliance right now, in my humble opinion, on technology. Why? Because it's less risk. It produces, but it's less risk. But what it doesn't do is get you in the room with somebody. It doesn't get you the thoughts in their head and the mindset and their plans and intentions. And there's no context either. So I think probably as far as intelligence is concerned, human intelligence, if not already, should have a much greater role in the future. I think we absolutely have to focus on that and focus on it in a meaningful way, not a bureaucratic way, but almost, to your point, go back to the OSS days where that creative out-of-the-box problem-solving mentality and ability to think about things differently was really the recipe for success in many cases.
How do you reconcile that with a more isolationist tendencies from a political side?
Yeah, I don't think you can have both ways. I think, and frankly, this isolationist tendency, if there is one, may in fact be a result of this over-reliance on tech. Because, you no longer need to go out and get it, right? I think in many ways it could just be a byproduct of that. But again, one thing is for sure, the threats that we have aren't going anywhere. They're evolving, they're changing, and we need to have humans in the mix. This is the second oldest profession in the world, and there's a reason for that. And like I said, as things evolve and change and ebb and flow, folks like me and my colleagues who are, in a break glass in case of emergency, eventually human intelligence is going to come to the forefront again. I don't see how that won't happen.
I mean, there's only so much that technology can do. And maybe switching gears a little bit.
Yeah, just one more point, Ahmed. Yeah, technology is great, but I can't go and ask ChatGPT, who's going to be the next head of some country. Or I can't ask ChatGPT, when there's going to be a terrorist attack. Or what the Ayatollah's thinking. It's, actually, it'd probably be kind of funny to do that.
Yeah.
maybe we should. We can ask ChatGPT what the Ayatollah's, thinking.
That would be an interesting one. What I wanted to ask you was, since you've worked in this field for so long, and you've probably worked with a lot of other intelligence services and against some, my first question would be, from your, and I know some people, they don't like to point this out, but from your career, who has impressed you the most? People from what agency? And the second question would be, in that, who do you think, from an adversarial perspective, was formidable to
Yeah,
go
wow,
against?
that's a really great question. Yeah, so as far as my experiences, this is the world according to me. There's two sets of partners that I love working with. So one of our friends, first of all, yes, they have their own agenda, but these are, our British colleagues and our other partners in the Five Eyes. The cooperation and the collaboration we receive from these partners is bar none. And frankly, pound for pound, they're doing things that are unbelievable because they understand resources and they understand priorities and they understand impact. So in that sense, I'd say, working with our British partners, for example, has been an unbelievable experience. The second set of partners that I love working with are those who are from maybe the less resourced part of the world. And not to get into names, but, the Far Eastern European countries, perhaps, or our Middle Eastern partners, or our African partners. And what I like about working with those partners is the level of industrious thinking they bring to the table. I am always amazed at the solutions that these partners come up with. We pose a first world problem to them and we have our first world solution, or our not even first world, our high-tech solution and our, modern solution. And then they come up with something that's just completely simple and low cost, because this is the world they live in. They have to have things that are low cost, right? And that work. And they never disappoint. And it's always something amazing. And it's always something just straightforward that you never thought of. And you say, wow, that'll work. And that's the one piece of my career working with foreign partners that I've always enjoyed, is just learning from them, because they always bring something to the table that, coming from the United States, I would never think of. It wouldn't be, actually, even our colleagues, it's not in the forefront of their minds when they're crafting solutions. And what I've also enjoyed about that is not only have I learned something, but I've been able to take that thought process and then apply it to other problem sets, because what it teaches you is to look at things from a simpler point of view, with simpler challenges imposed, or simpler constraints, let's say, imposed on your problem solving. So you do a lot of problem solving as a case officer in the agency. Some of it's on your own, some of it's working with others, but having the ability to creatively solve problems is, for me at least, has been a huge boon throughout my career. And that's one of the main things that separated me from the rest of the pack. And allowed me to really get involved in some fascinating things, and allowed me to rise up through the ranks and be acknowledged for my contributions.
So how about the second question?
The adversaries. Yeah, who poses the greatest threat to us, and who? Yeah, so
maybe not threat, but like from a tradecraft perspective,
right,
where you would say like, hey, those.
I mean, so here's an interesting way to look at it. One, I would not want to upset our closest partners, because frankly, they have all the resources and tools and thinking and training they need to turn those against us. So that's something you always have to think of. Not that our Five Eyes partners would do that. I'm sure they wouldn't. But that's definitely something that you're always thinking of. I think anywhere you're operating on the home turf, it doesn't matter who it is. It could be the smallest country on this planet. It could be the largest, most populated country. If you're on their turf, then they can own you if they want to. So in that sense, that's the great equalizer across the world for any intelligence officer. If you're in their home turf, it's just a matter of, them wanting to put the time and attention towards you and the resources. And like I said, they can own you. So that there basically means that all services, as far as their adversarial abilities, it's a great equalizer. As far as just an overall service and their capabilities, I would have to say probably the Russians, just because their depth of experience their level of expertise. Just reading, just looking at history. There's a fantastic book, for example, for anybody listening, called Russians Among Us. And it's all about the ghost stories operation and the Russian illegals program. But what you learn quickly is, they've been doing this for a long time. They didn't have diplomatic presence around the world in the early part of the century, and literally that's all they did was illegal operations. So they're the masters of these kinds of things in a way that I won't say the masters, but I will say that they bring a certain level of experience and a depth of experience to the table that has to be respected. And their tradecraft and their tradition and the Chekists and everything in between, their ability to run counter-surveillance and technical operations, all you have to do is look at the Cold War. And, I think the answer to your question would be the Russians. And what would make it even more challenging is operate against the Russians in country somewhere where they own the turf. So operating in Russia with the FSB, for example, who's a highly capable service that's evolved over, the last century plus, frankly, and now has been turned into basically an organized crime group meets an intelligence group, but with the home turf advantage. That to me is a triple threat.
Interesting. What I find fascinating here is that when you say that, I hope people listen, because this invasion of Ukraine, the one in Georgia, I think Russians often are presented as some bungling idiots that are just, tripping their way into conflicts. But we seem to forget that the war in Ukraine is still ongoing.
Yeah, for sure.
They kept Assad in power, where so many countries tried to get him out in Syria.
Right.
And if not respect, then definitely we have to be aware of it. Let's say that. I don't want
you have to acknowledge
like I'm cheerleading them, but
yeah, right. Yeah, I think one other thing to know too is you can't confuse the military might with the intelligence services. And I think, the world was basically surprised. I know I was, in terms of basically the hollow army that the Russians had as far as the Ukraine war goes. I think that came as a surprise to just about every, tactician out there. I think on the intelligence side, though, it's a very well-honed, sharp machine with, you have to respect them. You have to respect, what they've done. And you also have to respect rather, the adversary that they are. And I think in this current climate, unlike in the past, during the Soviet era, it's a bit more no holds barred in terms of what they're doing. That's why I mentioned it's not just intelligence collection that they're doing these days. They're, the FSB, for example, is a degree of thuggery that's entered into that group. And yeah, it's not a good situation right now. It's, so you take a capability and you add it, you add to the mix the thuggery organized crime element, and you're essentially, you're looking at a cartel almost, or a mafia group with intelligence capabilities, and that's
scary.
It's very scary. Yeah, very scary.
In the later half of later part of your career, you were involved in more development of younger officers. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. So to go back, I ended up getting a master's in adult education. I've always been interested in training and teaching and giving back. So one of the assignments I had was down at our iconic training facility. And I eventually became one of the heads of the training program, spy school, so to speak. And it was refreshing in so many ways. And here's why. So first of all, the job was fantastic. And the ability to have my fingerprints and on the future was incredible. And to design the curriculum and to bring all sorts of things into training using my background was a really amazing experience, whether it was adding technology, whether it was, working with psychologists, whether it was, just bringing teams together and refining the training program. super interesting, super impactful. But what I found most rewarding, and especially in a time right now where the younger generations are traditionally given a bad rap as being, lazy, or, almost like they treat life like a video game. They're not proactive. They don't go out and hustle, whatever you want to call it. What I found was that the group that we're hiring these days, it couldn't be more opposite. These are young, smart professionals, go-getters, people with so many talents, people who, can problem solve, people who are curious, people who want to work on a team, who want to achieve impact, and dedicated. And because in this day and age, the average person has 7 different careers or 3 different careers and 7 different employers, I think is the statistic. So to see people coming on board very much in the mindset, nobody works for an employer for 25 plus years anymore, by the way. But to see that kind of mindset walking in the door was just incredible. It was refreshing and invigorating and inspiring. And frankly, it made me want to bring out the best in me and the rest of the cadre to show these people and to share experiences and to ensure that, the future of the organization was in good hands and competent hands, and, was going to be able to fulfill the mission. Super
interesting.
Yeah, super rewarding.
Yeah, I can
Anybody
imagine.
who's done that job in any way, shape, or form will tell you the same thing. It's and I'd have to say personally, probably my favorite assignment. And I know that sounds strange. I've been involved in all sorts of crazy things and all sorts of front page news things. But as far as an assignment that checked all the boxes for me, that would be the one.
Very cool. So then you leave the agency. How does life look then?
Yeah, left the agency, retired, job well done. Yeah, 25 and a half years. I came on board when I was like 15 years old, right? No, I decided that I had done everything there was to do. I had been a senior manager for about 10 years, maybe even 15, and decided, you'll get a laugh at this, I wanted my last assignment to just be a line officer position. So I put in for an assignment out in the sandbox, so to speak, in an off-site location that's, off the grid. And I just did God's work. And actually, I applied for a job that was an entire pay grade lower than what I was already doing. And I literally sat, so it was my second time out to the war zones, chasing ISIS. But this time it was really just a lot of fun, because I knew this was it, and I knew I had a year left. And I was at the far end of this office, next to the disintegrator, next to the men's restroom, and next to the emergency exit. And it was me and 2, let's say, military folks. And we literally ran most of northeast Syria out of that little corner of the room. And it was a lot of fun. Let's just put it that way. All the things I had wanted to do in terms of dropping the gloves over the year, I was able to do. And it was just a really great way to wrap up an otherwise awesome career.
And how does life look now you're done on the other side?
Oh, man, life on the other side. This sounds like a song title. So life is good. Life is good, man. I've got 3 rules I live by. So I've started a consulting company called Wolfpack Consulting. And what we're trying to do is teach private sector teams how to function like, let's say, like CIA station teams, using that same methodology of sharing information and working together and having defined roles and mission objectives and everything in between. But the secret sauce that we've used for decades to essentially bring that to the private sector, and a lot of it involves using case officer skills in terms of networking and building trust-based relationships and meeting people and collecting information, of course. So yeah, so since then, I have 3 rules I live by. And the first is I don't want to work a 9-to-5 job anymore, now that I've semi-retired, so to speak. The second is wearing a suit and tie only on special occasions. And the third is I want to be able to pick and choose who I work with and choose people who I trust and I respect. So those are my three rules, essentially. And I need coffee. That's the fourth one.
Yeah.
No coffee, no worky.
Yeah.
But life's good. I've been able to branch out into some other directions. There's a part of me that's always been incredibly creative and imaginative, and I've always brought those skills and that ethos to the agency over the years. And again, that's been part of my secret recipe, let's say, for success. Now what I want to do is do something in the creative space, whether it's consulting on movies or scripts for spy movies or working with actors and directors and that kind of thing. I've also started some writing. So I've teamed up with some former colleagues, and we're looking at putting a book together, essentially, based on war stories and based on values, of all things. Because one of the things I've learned is you have to live by your values and you have to stand by your values. And it's so important these days. And the one group that most people don't think of, frankly, when it comes to values is, for better or worse, is look at it this way. The first group that doesn't come to mind is in the intelligence officer cadre or the law enforcement cadre, maybe to a certain extent. But right now in America, I feel that these two groups are kind of under fire, under the gun. And there's so many positive stories to tell that really demonstrate what it means to live by your values. And, and in any case, I think it's just critical to bring that to the public eye right now. And I hope this will serve as a guide for folks who are out there who might be challenged with, their own issues, or they might be adrift or needing some kind of resource in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of people still in the job listen to this podcast. So I think they will appreciate your words there. And I think anybody who chooses to serve deserves respect.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that, Ahmed.
Because, that's probably one of the selfless things you can do.
You're a good man. I appreciate those kind words. Public service is, to me, it's a very noble thing. It gets a bad rap a lot of times, but at the end of the day, I've always viewed myself as a sheepdog or a shepherd. And in terms of, doing my thing to keep us all safe and keep our family safe, at the end of the day, we all have to go home, right? And so it's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So for a young person that's looking now to go into that direction, go into intelligence, what would your advice be? You've already said tenacity and perseverance. What would you add to that?
I jotted down 4 things because I was thinking you were going to ask me this question. So the first is intellectual curiosity. You have to be curious.
Absolutely.
Actually, there's 5 things. I just added a 5th one in my head. Yeah, curiosity is huge. If you're not interested in the world around you, what makes people tick, then probably you should look at something else. The second thing, interpersonal skills, huge. In an era where we have social media consuming our lives, nobody talks to anybody anymore in person. To me, this is a very huge thing right now. I've got our teenage son is a university student. He's a documentary filmmaker. And, one of the things I've always taught him is be interesting and be interested. And that's how you do it. And be curious. If you can do those 2 things and ask questions, meaningful questions, you'll meet all sorts of people in life. And, who knows what can happen.
Absolutely.
I'd say staying positive. That's huge too. I've had lots of ups and downs in my life, losing my parents at an early age. My mom had Lou Gehrig's disease and my dad had pancreatic cancer. And it gets tough out there. You're managing a family and you have loved ones and staying balanced. And, and then you're also dealing with all these challenges. One thing about a case officer, every day you're going to work, it's, you're reading bad news. It's not good news stories, And frankly, we used to subscribe to People magazine and some other things while we were overseas just to kind of keep it light, right? But yeah, it's staying positive is huge. And how you do that is important. I think little nano gestures of positivity, whether it's just reflecting on all the blessings and the good things that have happened to you. When I was in the war zone, I made a habit. I knew I was going to be away from my family for a year and living in a container of all things. And I loaded up on pastel T-shirts, if you can imagine that, because I wanted to at least have one thing to start my day with that was bright and cheery, because I didn't know what was going to happen throughout the course of the day. And that's actually a habit I keep to this day. And I try to do that. Tenacity. That's the next one. You got to be tenacious. If you want it, go get it. Don't let anybody tell you what you can or can't do in terms of your limitations. Prove people wrong. I've made a career out of proving people wrong. I love nothing more when someone tells me I can't do something, or we've already done that before and it didn't work. That to me is you're dropping the gauntlet, telling me it's game on. And don't accept that. You go out and you prove them wrong. You let them show people what you can and can't do. And you do that with piss and vinegar too, man. My grandfather had a great expression. He'd always say, give them hell, lad. Always give them hell. That's what he used to say. And that's coming from a guy who knew what he was talking about. All right. And then the last thing, this has always been incredibly important to me, is creativity. So if you're a creative person thinking, hey, working in a bureaucracy is stifling, that seems very oppressive to me, what I'd have to tell you is it can be, depending on what you're doing. But if you find the right job, then you know what? That can actually be an incredible talent, an incredible skill you bring to the table that others don't have. So when you're thinking about a career, look at the things that make you who you are, that make you unique. Dive in, really, really use those skills to go to town. And, don't take no for an answer. That's for sure. I faxed in my resume every week at 9:30 for 12 weeks straight until finally somebody said, enough. Please stop faxing your resume. They called me back, I guess. But in any event, those are the kind of pearls I'd pass along.
Fantastic. I co-sign every single one of them. Yeah. I
cool.
think, I really think, because as you said, if you're dealt a hand in life that you were not expecting, those are the skill sets that you need to still get what you want. And you might not get it immediately, but everything that you get easy will not feel good.
Yeah,
not long at least.
That's true.
So,
and you're not always walking through the front door either. It's sometimes you got to climb through the window. Sometimes you got to go through the garage. You have to be creative in how you do things. And
a testament to that is that you and I are sitting in this podcast talking.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Last question for
Please.
you. What are you listening to? What are you reading?
Oh, man.
What is inspiring you? Since you're such a creative soul, now we expect super eclectic ideas.
Well, of course, I'm listening to the Great Dynamics podcast.
Hey,
that's
you
the
go.
first thing.
Yeah.
What am I listening to and reading? So, frankly, I just stumbled upon one of the most incredible podcasts I've ever found, and it's called The Real Dictators. And if you're not listening to that, you should be. It's so well produced, it's so detailed and factual, and the narrator is incredible. He's a guy named Mick Gann, and his voice is just perfect. So I just listened to an 8-part series on Libyan Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, because in the beginning of my career, I was focused on Libya nuclear weapons. And actually, that's kind of how I made my bones in the organization. I was at the forefront of that whole situation, so to speak. And it was a lot of fun, and I was able to really use some creative solutions and operationalize some things. And in any case, it was a really exciting time and an exciting challenge. So that is a fantastic podcast. There's other ones too on every major dictator you can think of. As far as books I'm reading right now, like I said, I'm trying to get into to revisit the Munich massacre. So there's several books on Black September and the Munich Olympics and I'm looking at a book called Vengeance right now. I just picked up. I had read it before, but I'm reading it again. And it's really a fascinating read. And then just a couple other books, frankly, that I've read, but I would read again because they're so good. One, that Russians Among Us book I mentioned to you, which is just fantastic. Yeah, it's super. For those interested in World War II history, which I'm very interested in, there's a book on a man named Fritz Kolb, and it's about World War II history. He was the highest ranked MFA official in the German government that the OSS recruited, and it's called A Spy in the Heart, the Third Reich, and it's fascinating. And somebody, I believe, has the rights to turn that into a movie. But if you're looking for a great read, that's a definite one. And then another book I always recommend to anybody. First of all, the Ben McIntyre books are fantastic. But Agent Zigzag, be remiss if I didn't mention that. If you had not read Agent Zigzag, pick that up. You won't put it down. It's just fantastic. And then there's a new Ben McIntyre book I haven't picked up yet, which is about the Iranian embassy hostage rescue attempt in 1980. It's called Under Siege, so that looks interesting. So that's on my read list, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Very cool. I think we were supposed to have one of the SAS guys that was on that mission on the podcast. Really? Yeah.
Awesome.
We haven't been able to get our schedules correct, but hopefully we can get him on. But yeah, amazing selection of books you give there. I mean, me and my wife have this competition who can read more books.
Excellent.
But I keep reading books on non-fiction books, and then she just goes through fiction like a hot butter through knife. So,
are you reading Harlequin romance novels, Ahmed?
No, I don't even know what that is.
With Fabio on the cover?
Those ones, yeah.
No, okay.
But no, I don't. I don't read those.
One other thing, I just discovered Slow Horses. I'm a little slow.
That's
frankly.
really good. Yeah.
Season 1 it was okay. I was not a big fan of season 1. I gotta be honest with you, because it was just anybody who's involved in this kind of thing. When you see stuff that's very far-fetched, it kind of makes you cringe. The acting was fantastic, don't get me wrong, and the character development. Season 2, however, is a different ball of wax, my friend. So I'm on the last episode tonight. I can't wait to see it.
Which is funny because for people that have never done this work, they would say, "Oh, it's very slow. It's very,
really? Yeah.
You know what I mean?" Yeah. I mean, that's what I hear from people, but
that's funny.
I think it's hard for me to watch these type of shows because I have to pause every 10 minutes because my wife has a question.
We go through that too in our house.
But that's a really good shout, actually. That's
two other great series too. I was going to say Fauda, of course, on Netflix.
Fauda, yeah.
And then the last one is a French one called The Bureau.
Yes,
and
I know it.
That's very good too. 99% of it's amazing. 1%'s a little off, but I found that to really capture kind of the dynamics of what goes on in an office, and then the plots and a lot of the interactions and the things that go on, especially on the counterterrorism side. It's very realistic, so it's good.
Yeah, it's a fantastic show. French, right?
Yeah, French. Yeah.
I would like to say, like, the very first podcast in this podcast was started out actually with somebody who was a former CIA officer.
Oh, really?
A good friend of mine, Jason, and Jason recommended in that episode a TV show with Jeff Bridges called The Old Man.
Ah, okay.
Right? Fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I have to add that to the list.
Yeah, and season 2 is out now. So it's on, I don't know how you see it in Europe, but it's on FX.
As my sources in the Middle East used to tell me, we have our ways.
Yeah. There you go. I bet you do. Do you have any question for me?
I don't. It's just been a real honor and a privilege being here and chatting with you. Thanks for the amazing questions, by the way.
No worries.
You're a thoughtful guy, and once again, you've proven yourself and your merits. So be happy to come back anytime and chat again.
We definitely will, because we thought we were going to do another type of podcast today. So
yeah, right.
We will come back on that one.
Yeah,
for
perfect.
sure.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Ray. Really, really appreciate you coming on and taking the time and telling about yourself and about your career, and appreciate your insights. And for everybody else listening, guys, if you have any questions, we will add Ray's LinkedIn stuff, if you want, obviously, to the show notes, and where they can reach you. And if you want to be reached, Ray.
Yeah, of course I do.
But outside of that, if you made it this far, thank you so much for the support. Thank you for the patience. I haven't done an episode, I think, for 5 months or so, or 4 months. And please forgive me. We had a little baby, so that was our focus this summer. So I hope everybody listening understands. And I see you in the next one. Thank you, Ray, again.
Privilege and an honor, Ahmed. Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.